Mustafa Hafez, meanwhile, was still alive. The Egyptian intelligence captain and his colleague in Jordan, Salah Mustafa, continued running squads of Palestinian infiltrators, and those infiltrators were still wreaking havoc in Israel. On March 17, 1954, a gang of 12 Arab terrorists ambushed a civilian bus on its way from Eilat to Tel Aviv at Scorpion Pass, a winding stretch of road in the heart of the Negev Desert. Firing point blank, they killed 11 passengers. A 9-year-old boy, Chaim Forzenberg, hiding under the seat, got up after they left the bus and asked, "Have they gone?" The terrorists heard him, returned to the bus, and shot him in the head. He survived, but was paralyzed until his death 32 years later. The Arabs mutilated and spat on the bodies of the dead. It turned out later they were Palestinians and Bedouins who had come from Jordan and were supported by Salah Mustafa. Sharet was under heavy pressure to retaliate, but he would not approve of a revenge operation, saying, "An act in reaction to the bloodbath would only blur the horrifying effect and would place us on the same level as the mass murderers on the other side," is what he wrote in his diary. Instead, Amman's Unit 504 sent in a detail of 3 Bedouin assassins whom they employed as agents. They crossed into Jordan heavily armed and carried 2 explosive devices prepared by Tom Rothberg. They discovered where one of the terrorists lived, in a village in southern Jordan, and after deciding not to blow up his house, they waited until he was alone and shot him dead. Our agents found the ID card of the bus driver among the things he'd looted and brought it back to us, Yigal Samon, a 504 senior veteran, recounts. This pinpoint operation was considered a success by the 504th, but it didn't make much of a difference in the wider picture. Targeted killings, with their limited success, had failed to stop or even noticeably stall the cross-border attacks. Punitive raids had drawn global ire but hadn't slowed the carnage. In the middle of the 1950s, Hafez was winning. The terrorists he trained carried out ever more deadly attacks in Israeli territory, collecting intelligence, sabotaging infrastructure, stealing property, and killing Israelis. Israel, lacking proper infrastructure, included high-resolution intelligence. Experience, know-how, and a large enough trained and equipped forces could respond only with increasingly non-specific retaliation operations and heavy bombing of the Gaza Strip. Hafez's name appeared frequently in the reports that Unit 504 received from its sources in the south, yet he was a vague figure cloaked in shadows. "We never got a picture of him," said Yaakov Nimrodi, who commanded the unit's southern base, "but we knew that he was a young man of about 30, fairly good-looking, and very charismatic. Our prisoners and agents spoke of him with admiration and awe." Hafez and Nimrodi himself, of a young, charismatic officer, stood on either side of the Arab-Israeli conflict. Hafez was considered one of the best minds in Egyptian intelligence. Nimrodi said, "Few were our agents who managed to slip through his fingers. Many were captured and liquidated or became double agents after the treatment they had received from him, and they turned against us. In this war of minds, only the best won and survived." Against the background of the security impotency and under heavy public pressure, Sharet was compelled first to accept Ben-Gurion as his defense minister, then to give him back the premiership in November of 1955. Sharet went back to being just the foreign minister and later was forced to resign under pressure from Ben-Gurion. Ben-Gurion's return encouraged Amman to again plan more vigorous attacks on the Fedayeen. One idea was to do away with Hafez. He was the head of the snake, Nimrodi said. That we had to cut off. But this was difficult for 3 reasons, said Avraham Dar, who now, as a major in Amman, was charged with gathering intelligence about Hafez. First, collecting enough intelligence about him and about the places he frequented. Secondly, getting to him and killing him. And third, the diplomatic problem. He was a senior officer in the army of a sovereign state. Hitting him might have been seen as crossing a red line in relations with Egypt and led to deterioration. Attempts by the UN to mediate between Israel and Egypt failed, and Hafez's raids continued through 1955 and into the spring of 1956. On April 29th of 1956, a squad of Palestinian guerrillas trained by Hafez opened fire on farmers working in the fields of Nahal Oz, a kibbutz on Israel's southern border. I think a kibbutz is a settlement. Roy Rothberg, a young first lieutenant in the IDF reserves in charge of security for the kibbutz, rode out on horseback to repel them. The Palestinians killed him, gouged out his eyes, and dragged his body through the field across the trench that marked the border, an effort to suggest that Rothberg had invaded foreign soil. Moshe Dayan took Rothberg's death particularly hard. He had met the lieutenant only the day before as he toured southern settlements. The next day, April 30th, Dayan stood over Rothberg's open grave and read a eulogy that, in the intervening years, had come to be seen as a seminal formulation of Israeli militarism. Mind you, he only met him for one day. Roy was murdered yesterday in the early morning. The silence of the spring morning blinded him, and he did not see those lying in wait at the edge of the furrow. Let us not today cast blame on the murderers. Who are we to argue against their potent hatred for us? For 8 years they have been sitting in the refugee camps in Gaza, and before their eyes we have been turning the land and villages which their forefathers lived, into our own inheritance. We are the generation of settlement, and without steel helmets and the maw of the cannon, we will not be able to plant a tree or build a home. Our children will not live if we do not dig shelters, and without barbed wire fences and machine guns, we will not be able to pave roads or drill for water. Millions of Jews, annihilated because they had no country, gaze at us from the dust of Jewish history and command us to settle and raise up a land for our people. We must not flinch from seeing the hatred that accompanies and fills the lives of hundreds of thousands of Arabs who live around us and wait for the moment when they are strong enough to get our blood. We will not avert our gaze lest our hands grow weak. This is our generation's destiny. In simple terms, Dayan meant that the Jews in the state of Israel may have arrived as settlers returning to their ancient homeland, but from the perspective of the Arabs, they came as invaders. Therefore, the Arabs, justifiably from their point of view, hated the Jews. And the continued existence of the Jews depended more than anything on their ability to defend themselves against the Arabs who wished to kill them. All the rest, development, the economy, society, and the culture, were subordinate and must bend to the needs of security and survival. This, in Dayan's view, was Israel's destiny, born of 1,000 years of Jewish history. Wouldn't it be like a couple thousand? Because whatever. Standing over the grave as Dayan spoke as Roy's cousin, Nathan Rothberg, the bomb maker. After the funeral, Nathan promised his uncle, Shmariyahu, that he would avenge Roy, his son. As it happened, Dayan was determined to avenge Roy, too. It all seemed the other Israeli kills. Start that whole thing over, read it poorly. As it happened, Dayan was determined to avenge Roy as well, and to all the other Israelis killed and terrorized by Hafez's squads. This time, Dayan persuaded Ben-Gurion not only to launch a retaliation raid against the Palestinian village, but to allow him to instruct the intelligence community to kill Egyptians running killers into Israel. The colonists, Hafez and Salah. I'm going to reread that whole thing one more time because that's I hate the way they use these stupid hyphens. Like, you could use a semicolon, like a really hard comma. I just refuse to do it. and there's no flow. As it happened, Diane was determined to avenge Roy as well, and all the other Israelis killed and terrorized by Hafez's squads. This time, Diane persuaded Ben-Gurion not only to launch a retaliation raid against a Palestinian village, but to allow him to instruct the intelligence community to kill the Egyptians running killers into Israel, the colonels Hafez and Salah. This was a significant escalation. Fucking shit-ass writing. Avraham Dar wrote the operational order, which was codenamed Eunuch, or Saris. As far as can be ascertained, this was the first operational order for a targeted killing that was both written and carried out in the history of the State of Israel. In light of Egypt's organization of Fedayeen activities in the Gaza Strip and Jordan, Dar wrote, it has been decided to act against its organizers, Mustafa Hafez in the Gaza Strip and the Egyptian military attaché in Jordan. The goal? The physical elimination of the said two men with booby-trap bombs. In Hafez's case, Dar recalls, it was clear to us the bomb had to be given to him by someone he trusted. They found their man in Muhammad al-Talalqa, a young Bedouin who lived in the Gaza Strip and was working for both Hafez and Unit 504. Al-Talalqa and Hafez were not aware that 504 knew he was a double agent, and the Amman unit decided to exploit this and give him something in a package that would seem to him so important that he would immediately take it to Hafez. What could that something be? A book that included all the ciphers in Morse code used by the Israelis, which Talalqa would be instructed by 504 to take to another Israeli agent in Gaza. Once again, the services of Roy Rothberg were called for. He would indeed avenge his cousin.